Hi, this is Paul. Earlier this week, I did a video on authority, and I was talking about authority is sort of to climb it as competence and confidence and reliability is to weather. One person left a comment about, well, isn't the Bible authoritative? And it showed me that in this video, sometimes it might have been possible for people to not understand that I was talking about sort of the human perspective on this. And so actually this morning when I was creating the PowerPoints for my sermon, a lot of this was still rolling through me, and so you'll get a little bit of the rough draft that will come through tomorrow unless it changes. Some of this language won't be strange to you because many of you have been following John Vervaeke, The Meaning Crisis, and all of these things for a while. Our senses are transjective. What do I mean by that? Our eyes have something to see. Our ears have something to hear. Our taste buds have salt to taste. What our senses do is connect us to the outside world. They certainly are filtered and functioning through our mind. So there's a lot going on here. But in that sense, they're transjective because they're between us. Now, we have clearly the five senses that we talk about regularly, and nobody sort of denies: sight, sound, touch, taste. Sight, sound, touch, taste. Sound, touch, taste. I'm forgetting one. That's okay. We've got five. And when they're working properly, I'm seeing that there's a little remote here. I'm seeing that there's a cup here and I can grasp it. And so our senses are working. Now, if you get to C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain, part of his argument early in the book is that we actually have more than five senses. And he says that to a certain degree, morality is sort of like a sense. And the numinous is like a sense. And Lewis goes into that at the beginning of the problem of pain, that when we walk into, let's say, a haunted house or a room or something, and we sort of sense something, that's we sense the spooky or the ghosts or the metaphysical. That's sort of the sense of the numinous, this awe. It isn't from our senses, but we have a sense of it. And there's a sense of morality: good, bad, right, and wrong. And it's, again, not like our sense of sight, but we have a sense of morality. And just like with all of our senses are not foolproof. Our senses are not infallible. But for the most part, we rely on our senses, and our senses are good enough. And so there's senses of morality, there's senses of the numinous, and these are transjective too, because the idea is that morality is a guide to good, bad, right, and wrong out in the world. And people, and even people who claim to be moral skeptics, that there's no moral realism, very much act as if there is. And the same with the numinous. These things are sort of undeniable in many respects. And as I was thinking about this question of authority, which I think is deep in the question of what has happened to religion, if you go back to this cover, why religion went obsolete, I think a big part of it has to do with authority. Now, I'm talking about authority in the sense of the authority that individuals and groups recognize. And authority, as it relates to groups, is super important because authority is actually essential for groups to work together and be cohesive. And if you think, for example, part of what happens in the Enlightenment and part of what happens in the Protestant Reformation is that authority is breaking down. The church is losing authority, and the church is losing authority because of questions about the clerical abuse. Churches losing authority. People just are no longer believing things. Again, this is like a transjective sense. People aren't fully in charge of the authorities that they bow to and respect to and recognize, both individually and communally. It's just a sense of authority that they bow to and respect and act in conjunction for and against. So I think in that way, understanding authority, a sense of authority as another sense, in the sense of the luminous and our moral sense, or a sense of the luminous, I think that's a good way to think about authority. That, like we have a sense of a morality, we have a sense of the numinous, I think we have a sense of authority. Now, part of what's true about our senses, if you go like into one of these cave tours or mine tours, and they turn out all the lights and it's completely dark, our senses try to fill in when nothing's coming in. And, I'm continuing to work my way through the telepathy tapes. Super interesting. I'll have more to say about that as we go, likely. Probably not in this video, but we'll see. But and if you don't have anything to hear, you'll tend to hear things. And if you don't have anything to see, you'll tend to see things. And part of that, I think, is sort of the transjective way that our mind is trying to fill in and projecting. But part of that might be that, in fact, let's say if you're blind, you'll other senses will sort of pick up, and some of these other senses might be some of these other senses beyond the five. And so this transjective quality is tricky. We are fooled by our senses, and I would say, just as we're fairly easily fooled in terms of our sense of taste, for example. If you look into things like artificial sweeteners, basically what we've learned to do is use certain chemicals to fool our sense of taste in terms of the sweet. And optical illusions and many things sort of fool our sense of sight. We can fool our sense of hearing. We can fool our sense of touch. In other words, these things aren't foolproof, but they're sort of transjective. And when we're not getting something in, we sort of hunt for it. And I think this is true also of our sense of authority, that when there's a gap in authority, our senses of authority sort of go out and try to hunt for authorities to invest in, because without authorities we cannot navigate. Sort of like without anything to see, those of us who are used to navigating by sight, if things are completely blind, then we try to rely on our other senses in order to move and to navigate. And same with hearing, echolocation. If you can't see, you develop hearing and stronger hearing, and your hearing is much more nuanced. And they even have some ideas about the brain, that other portions of the brain will sort of relocate its assets to, well, if we don't need all of this stuff being dedicated to sight, well, then let's dedicate more to hearing. And then same with the economy of our consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. Now, our sense of authority is, we look for symbols and signs to indicate a sense of authority. And for example, this is the California State Capitol. So many of the architectural features of this, the dome, the pillars, the statues, the architecture itself is designed to lend the legislature that is housed by this building, go ahead, leave your jokes and your comments in the comments section, a sense of authority. Because both as individuals and as communities, we need authority in order to function, to give us our sense of right and wrong. In all these ways, the senses sort of work together. Our ability to work together requires a shared authority. If there's no shared authority, it's absolutely impossible for people. It's almost impossible for people to work together on various things, because we have so many phrases. They need to be on the same page, and that's really talking about authority. Now, authority is like climate, and competence is like weather. And what I mean by that is our sense of authority isn't made in a day. We can use that John Vervaeke clip to talk about how we as little children sort of gain our sense of authority, and our parents have authority. And if our parents are good and competent and they've done well with us and things have gone well, we give our parents a sense of authority, and it's very natural. And there can be little moments where we might doubt our parents' authority, but for the most part, again, it's more like climate. It's more durable, it's bigger, it's more than just sort of the moments of weather that we experience. But if you have enough cumulative weather data, the authority cloud will begin to dissipate, and people will go looking for other authorities. I had one of the most enjoyable, amazing, jaw-dropping Randos conversations that I've ever had with Raymond. Raymond works with the symbolic world to help them organize their website. He works in technology, but he has one heck of a story. And there's so many elements to this story that it's going to take me a little while to sort of process it. It's in No Wait, No Ads, but it'll be out as usual this weekend or next week or at some point. And it's so interesting because in his past, he had a father that was not a good father. And this, of course, is not something new or unique to him. None of our fathers are perfect, but if fathers are good enough, we sort of maintain parental authority. And if your religion is good enough, you sort of maintain religious authority. And if your school is good enough, they sort of maintains authority. If, in fact, the weather of incidences are completely bad, then there's sort of no climate authority to actually give people someone. So then they will, in fact, construct some amount of authority. And I think in many ways, cynicism itself becomes an authority for some people, and they work to not trust. I was thinking about that when we got to this point of the conversation.
It's just very hard for me to square the chaff thing.
Yep.
For God.
Yep.
And what Michael Hyde started me on was that, Jesus doesn't lose. He's a conqueror. He's a conqueror of the absolute evil that had come into the world post-flood after it had been wiped out, and how was he going to do that? And that what he had come to do was win through people's hearts the geography of the world, and that was a very different frame for me than penal substitutionary atonement. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't be a penal substitute, believe in that without having that, a view, but it does make the focus a little bit different, I think, as you delve into it and take it seriously.
Yeah.
And so after that happened, and the whole Jordan Peterson thing, and while this Peterson thing was going on, I was also like, wait, is Christianity just like the best story? Is that actually what it is? Is it really? And that's, I think, the biggest danger for someone like Peterson is that people just kind of swallow the best pill that Nietzsche made for us.
Yeah.
It's just like it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever read Watchmen, Alan Moore.
No.
Comic. Anyway, like at the end, spoilers, everybody. But at the end, what the villains, the trick that he does is that he like creates this like squid monster from another world. And he tricks the world into coming together to go against this squid monster, and it creates world peace because he creates this like other that forces unity.
He sort of understood Rene Girard and said,
exactly,
if we had a squid monster,
the ultimate scapegoat,
that would finally bring unity to the world. Yep.
Exactly. Yep. And I think that the danger with someone like Peterson is that, and I mean, I don't know his motivations at all. This is just what I'm saying is, like, if his motivations are bad, if he's the kind of person like my dad, and I'm not saying he is, but if he's the kind of person like my dad that has just a longer term view of what good is, maybe, or like a bigger view of like how to win or influence people or whatever,
Yeah.
maybe a more noble view. It's still a lie,
Well, I think
right?
Peterson's, I think Peters, I think you're right in that for Peterson, it is the greatest story. I mean, it was just on Joe Rogan. You'll hear him say this a lot, say a lot in connection with ARC. And so I think to a degree for Peterson, he sort of seems, sort of sees late modern civilization as the pinnacle, and woke was sort of the corruption of that. And so he wants to sort of reinstantiate late modern civilization. And the way to do that is to shore up Christianity, not necessarily, yeah, you can have the institutions and the art and the practices. Those are part of the whole thing. But all of that again is kind of in service to late modern civilization. And
Yeah,
so
it's
we
will to power, but a Christian
yeah,
will to
yeah,
power.
yeah, in some ways.
What I'm saying is that, like, hey, adopt this. This is how we win.
Yes, yes, yes. And this is what works. Peterson is a
This is what works.
pragmatist, and he
Nietzsche
said
was
that.
wrong. Nietzsche was wrong because he thought Christianity didn't reflect human nature correctly, right? Strong against the weak, all that. That's wrong. What's actually right is, living for other people and, like, sacrificing to the
Right.
highest
Yep, yep.
ideal. But is this real,
Right.
or is this the story that we're being told?
Yeah, I would say Peterson says it's real. I think he thinks it's
Yeah,
real, but it again, in terms of the telos, it's you're finally trying to get back to this ideal, which was maybe 1999 before the wokesters kind
exactly,
of ruined everything.
exactly. So anyway, but I brought this up, and I'm really not trying to cast any aspersions to Peterson or
No,
anything
I
like that.
understand.
But what I'm saying is that I was kind of like, is that what's happening here? Like, is that Christianity? Like, have I just kind of sucked myself into a cult of thinking,
Yeah,
like that?
another cult of
But
thinking.
yeah, exactly. And I'm always very aware of these things,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
what am I doing here?
You should be very aware of cultish behavior given
Exactly,
how
exactly.
you
I
were
think so. I
raised.
think so.
It's like,
I
ah,
think
people
so.
can
I could
really
also be
fall
really
into
bad
this.
at it too. So,
Yeah.
but I think reading people like Heiser, and then I came in contact with Girard and, you know, other. One of the biggest books that I read, very, very. It was like maybe 3 or 4 months before I discovered orthodoxy and Jonathan Pajot and all of that stuff, was "Saving the Appearances"
Oh
by
yeah,
Owen
yeah,
Barfield.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And reading that book, it really, it like, it shocked me, because what I realized was I was living inside a very small telescope, and I was looking through the world in this with this very limited view of things that I just took as presuppositions,
Yeah.
you know, and to think how a medieval or an ancient person viewed the world when they looked up at the stars. And when they looked at the stars, what they saw, and I don't mean saw as in what when the light hits your eye, right? What they saw was the angels circling, creating a unity of meaning that actually had a bearing on
Yeah.
how I lived my life day after day.
Yeah, the discarded image. I don't know if you've read that by Lewis.
Yes, yeah,
That's what they saw. They saw that discarded
exactly.
image. Yeah.
And that, that really started me going like, whoa, like, how does, what is it like to be like that? How do you get there? How do you even get to that? And I would say providentially, um, you know, I started kind of investigating that whole thing, which was really just totally, I was blinded to it in some way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think part of it was just we in the West, and especially America, we just have no reason to investigate anything like that.
Yeah.
We have this manifest destiny idea of what the right kind of life and the right kind of, how to live is the right way. That's
Yeah.
just what it is. And you can't argue with it because people aren't dying of starvation, and
Yep.
there's medicine and stuff like that. So
And it
why
looks
even go
really
there?
good. It looks really
Yeah,
good. I mean, if you are successful, I mean, this is interesting, especially in connection with your father's cultish behavior, because all of those cults leverage a certain vision of the good life. And you're
right.
selling that because you're saying if you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of fame, if you have a lot of status and reputation, well, that's what the good life is. And you've had an opportunity to, and I'm not saying everyone with status and reputation and wealth has gotten it the way your father has, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's many, that vision of the good life continues to sell as long as, again, you don't actually achieve it and begin to realize, hey,
exactly.
wait a minute. Um,
This
and
doesn't fulfill me.
That's right. I've already been on TV say I'm going to. I've been to Disneyland, and it didn't. Do I go? Do I have to go to Disneyland again? Because and then especially, I mean, it's sort of the Jordan Hall thing. Once you get to the top and you look around, you
Yeah,
realize, oh, wait a minute, this is not like I thought the inner ring was supposed to be.
exactly.
And then
It's a
suddenly,
bunch of broken people that have no idea what they're doing.
right, and they're just as scared and frantic and
Exactly.
beholden to their vices as the dude sleeping over in front of the bus stop. And
That's right.
then you're
Exactly.
suddenly like, wait
And
a
that guy in the
minute.
bus stop might have something worked out a little bit better than them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. All right. So, two things there. One is, of course, the discarded image that we imagine by reading their writings, by looking at their way of life, that their ladders climbed a different wall. And we imagine that, again, just read C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image. Above the moon, so the moon is like the next stop, and above that you have the ether, and you have this, sort of a mashup. You've got some Aristotle, you've got the spheres, you've got the movement of the stars, they're angels. C.S. Lewis, it's not just a burning ball of gas. But again, if you read the Discarded Image, Lewis sort of laments in it and says, the only problem is didn't didn't work out physically in terms of our descriptions. And of course, well, okay, what are we to do about that? Just where is it? This just came out, and I've listened to most of it, and it was quite interesting because I don't follow. YouTube will tell me these are the channels that your audience watches most, and Lotus Eaters is one of the channels. And I never watched Lotus Eaters. For a long time, I had no idea what is this Lotus Eater. So finally, I clicked on it. So okay, Sargon of Akkad. Well, that sort of makes sense. Peterson, classical liberalism, and so this young man here with the brown beard is really leaning into Sargon and saying, let's get to the bottom of your religious life. And the whole interview is interesting, at least the 3/4 of it that I've listened to, but let's start with some of it.
For quite a while, and I'm so honoured to, of course, be sitting down with you one-to-one as well. Thank you.
My pleasure, man.
How have you been?
Really well. Busy.
Yeah, oh yeah. I've seen you've been very, very busy with...
But otherwise, very good, thanks.
Good stuff. Now, this conversation, I wanted to centre it all around atheism, theology in the modern world now, and I wanted to get your views on lots of different topics within the topic of theology. Would you say that you're on a type of spiritual journey at the minute, or are you not? Are you still an atheist? I believe you were involved somewhat in some conversations around theological topics online and debates. Has your view changed over the years?
So I used to be a new atheist by default, basically. I liked watching Christopher Hitchens' videos online, like everyone else. And I'd not been raised in a religious society, so I was just a materialist, just like everyone else. And I don't think that's great. I think there are problems that arise from this. Because I think that man is a spiritual animal, whether he likes it or not, right? But the thing is, the thesis of
Now of what goes on here is just a spiritual animal, and we're all supposed to say, oh, we know what you mean by that, when in fact materialists have no idea of what we mean by that. And I would say that just about all of us have no idea what they mean by that. Someone from the medieval period would have some ideas about what they mean by that, and that's sort of where the telepathy tapes come in, because what you have there is a really interesting set of, looks like pretty undeniable and replicable instances where you can say, yeah, the materialist conception of the mind and consciousness, it really doesn't work. Now, everybody's like, we have to study this more to figure it out. And it's sort of like, well, that's kind of the materialist approach to it, because if we can reduce it down to mechanism, then maybe we can control it and employ it and add technology and so on and so forth, even though human beings have been working on spiritual technology a lot longer than we'd been working on materialist or physicalist technology.
materialism is very persuasive. As in, if the universe is just atoms and void, and it mechanically moves on itself to produce certain predictable outcomes, then if that's all that there is, then everything spiritual was essentially nonsense from the word go. And the progress of science kind of implies that, yeah, that is all that there is. And so the more science advances, the more almost ridiculous the spiritual component of human life looks, because the magic in the universe was there to explain things that we didn't have answers to. Why does the sun get...
So again, he's got a lot of God of the gaps type assumptions in here. And it's so funny because listening to him, it's almost like I'm kind of being transported back to the 19th century. It's almost like we're, working our way backwards through the Enlightenment as we sort of reached peak Enlightenment, and now we're kind of, but of course we're not really going back to the 19th century. We're in the 21st century and things are changing.
Travel across the sky? Well, Helios and his sun chariot brings it across. And so every single day the sun rises and the seasons change, and the predictable patterns of life are explained with a story that doesn't describe what is actually happening. Science...
And this is where C.S. Lewis in The Discarded Image gets into this, because a lot of what happens in terms of natural philosophy is, well, let's get a better predictive system for describing how the stars move and how the planets move beyond angels pushing them. But again, it's so easily dismissive in this abstraction sort to say angels pushing, when just understand that when we say gravity pushing, we've just sort of, or gravity pulling, we've just sort of taken the word angel out and put the word gravity in. Not that we, especially 99.99999% of us that so flippantly use the word gravity, have any understanding of how gravity works. But, push the angels away and just put in gravity. Well, what is gravity? Well, gravity is this force. Oh, okay. And, again, C.S. Lewis runs through all of this stuff in terms of language and says, we're just sort of swapping out words here. But if you swap out gravity for angel, just our imagination has lots of other things connected with angels that we sort of strip gravity away from. And this will get into what he talks about with deism. This actually was a really interesting interview. I really enjoyed it.
Actually seems to describe what is actually happening. And in doing so, the demystification of the universe around us strips away the spiritual element. If it's all just atoms and void moving on one another, then there isn't any room for God in this. And the persuasive power of science is found in the technological progress that we find ourselves with. The fact that we can sit here and do this is in some way a kind of proof that there's no God to the materialist perspective. And having been raised as a materialist, it's hard to feel spiritual, right? The sort of whatever organ in the human soul in
And I think he's being really honest and really clear here. And I deeply appreciate the honesty and the clarity.
the body, that it controls the sort of the spiritual feeling that one has, is at best deeply atrophied for me. And so I don't have any religious impulses. I don't feel the need to pray to a god when things are going wrong. I don't feel the need to be part of a spiritual congregation or something like this. And so there's a part of me that feels I have a disability in some way, right? Like people raised in modernity in atheistic societies are just, they don't go to church because they just don't want to, right? Most people, like 90 or 89% of people, something like that, don't go to church. And it's just because they just don't want to. They just don't feel no impulse to do so. Because to them, the universe...
They don't want to. They certainly don't feel like they need to. And in terms of people who go to church regularly, certainly a portion of it is custom and habit, as David Hume would say. But many people who go to church feel the need to go to church. And again, if you would ask them and sort of pursue with them, well, what is this need that you feel? And they'd be, for the most part, quite foggy on it. Some of them would be very clear. But whether it's a whole nother question about human beings as to when you sort of prompt them to give a reason for a certain behavior, whether that reason that they give has a lot of correlation with the behavior that they're showing. And this, of course, is famous. There's all these split brain experiments where, you know, the hand being controlled by one side of the brain, they ask the other side of the brain, why is that hand doing it? Just make it a completely separate story. Often that makes absolutely no sense. So we as human beings are, as Jonathan Haidt pointed out, that chattering rider on the elephant, we as human beings are really good at just making up stories to try to explain things. But whether this would have worked, for example, if you tell a person that I feel I need to go to church because of X, well, fear of hell. And then I can point to a whole bunch of universalists that say, I have absolutely no fear of hell. And I don't think even hell is real. And I think everybody gets there. So I go to church because I want to, or because I want to please God, or because I enjoy it, or because the coffee's free, or because for most of us, the reasons we give might not, if in fact you could actually test it, have much correlation with the actions that we are actually participating in.
The universe isn't actually mysterious, and there isn't an afterlife worth worrying about. And so we're stuck in this position where we're a bunch of materialist consumers just existing on a rock in space for no reason until we die.
And you say that's bad?
Yeah, I don't think that's great. I think that's pretty sour. And the atheists who came before us.
And in terms of the vibe shift, I think he sort of nails it. It's like before it was like, woohoo, we don't have to go to church anymore. And now he's kind of like, boy, nobody going to church? It's becoming a problem. And this is broader in society with utilitrads and like I was talking to Ray about that. Well, we really want people to go to church, at least sort of herd immunity of church participation, so that we can enjoy the fruits of Western civilization like we used to enjoy them. Okay. So should we, the Puritans used to try to force people to go to church under pain of penalty. That's not what you really want. And they both agree on that.
Viewed themselves as being very clever. There's a huge amount of vanity in atheism. But particularly vanity, sort of Bertrand Russell's up to the Christopher Hitchens of, I'm smarter than you, that's why I'm an atheist. It's like, okay, but look at the world you're making. And the world you're making is actually one where everyone takes antidepressants, people kind of hate the place in which they live, and everything, the material quality of everything is declining. Like, things aren't getting better the more atheist we get. Things are getting worse. When was the last time we built something impressive like a cathedral? Could we have some nice buildings? No. We get the cheapest, grey-faced flat tenements that people get to pack into now. Because if we're just human cattle, then any transcendent aspect of human life is just, it's a fancy at best, right? It's not important. And so this has not been to the benefit of mankind, I think. And yet I don't know if there's a way to stop it.
Do you feel...
Sorry, no, it's like...
No, yeah.
It's a pretty bleak outlook I'm
Yeah.
giving there, I'm afraid.
You know, I feel as though science over there, because I was exactly the same. I used to love watching Dawkins. I loved watching Hitchens as well. And even, you know, today with Alex...
No, I think part of what I found important about this interview was we have a serious selection bias in the corner with respect to the Peterson-Peugeot pipeline of people winding up in church. And if you just pay attention to the selection of people in the corner, you would say, like many channels have, everybody's going to church. And it's like, no, not everybody. By no means everybody. Now, we've got a particularly smart, capable, very impressive sample. I don't mean very impressive in terms of size, but very impressive in terms of quality. The kinds of people going back to the church are, and I think in many ways, some of the brightest and the best that we see around. That could also be a biased sample. But many, many other people are sort of sitting here like this. Now, I think, again, more of them will probably kind of slowly go into church. But what Sargon is about to say, I think churches have to listen to with utmost seriousness.
Alex O'Connor and, you know, people like that debating, although Alex O'Connor has become an agnostic through his consistent, I would call it searching, personally. Do you feel like you're searching?
No.
No?
Well, I don't feel like I'm missing something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. The problem is if you approach it in a consequentialist manner, not only do you kind of miss the purpose of religion, God's meant to be the font from which everything springs. So God is a fundamentally deontological concept that precedes all things. So trying to reconstruct God from the consequences, well, is to suggest that he's actually not the wellspring from which everything comes anyway. So the actual attempt itself is self-defeating. So you just can't do it. So if the consequences are bad and God is the wellspring from which everything comes, you would have to conclude that God made it this way on purpose, to challenge us, to test us. And this was the thesis that people throughout the Middle Ages had, because life in the Middle Ages was really tough.
Really tough.
A lot of people really, really suffered. And the amount of human suffering seemed just incomprehensible. And
you know, this is where we sort of have our imaginative time travel. And Ray talked about, you know, I really want to go back to the Middle Ages so that when I look up at the sky, and you can get into the whole enchantment thing. When I look up at the sky, I can see the hand of God with his angels moving the stars. And then Sargon says, well, Middle Ages, life was really, really tough. Yeah, but life is tough now too. And C.S. Lewis makes this point in The Problem of Pain that measuring suffering is actually kind of a difficult thing. Now, we might look at a bunch of people with first world problems and say, oh, yeah, you're longing to have this boyfriend or this girlfriend or this job or this car or this money or this employment or this reputation or this or this or this or this, and you don't have it, but you have a perfectly fine car, a perfectly fine set of clothes, a perfectly fine relationship, or a perfectly fine reputation, and you don't enjoy it. But suffering is a very weird thing, because you can live in a wonderful house and suffer greatly, even if you don't have physical pain, just because, and of course the Buddhists, you know, we're onto this, because suffering is something that happens in our mind, and even if you have a delta between expectation and realization, that will cause suffering. And whether your delta is up here or your delta is down there, you know, it's maybe a Monty Python-esque Middle Ages where, a moldy scrap of bread, it's the best day in the world, I'm living my best life now, I can gnaw on this moldy scrap of bread. Hey, joy, gratitude, there it is. He's enjoying it. And so we sort of have all of these assumptions about utilitarianism or negative utilitarianism that, well, people today are much happier. And it's like, I know psychologists are trying to measure this and we have happiness studies and yada, yada, yada. But hey, color me skeptical on some of these things. I don't know. And so then we want to sort of get back to, and I think this is part of the movement towards religious tradition and ritual, because, and I'm not saying it's wrong-headed, but basically if we do as they did, maybe we'll feel what they feel, and maybe that climate of authority will reinstantiate. And I've long said that people believe together. So if you want to believe what someone else believes, live with them, share life with them, spend time with them, talk with them. Because one of the most reliable things about human beings is that you will be increasingly become like the kinds of people that you spend time with and pay attention to. That's what you will be like, because that's how we are. And all of these dynamics that are beyond our volition, such as what we find authoritative in a durable way. Again, it's sort of like Jonathan Haidt with the rider and the elephant. The rider isn't controlling the elephant. The only way you can actually change the course of the elephant is to change the elephant's path. And so this then gets into, okay, ritual and trying to intentionally create a context so that the context can then produce in me the outcomes that I'm looking for. Let's say a pervasive climate of authority that is healthy and motivating and communal, so that together we can build pretty buildings and do many more things.
Couldn't understand why a loving God would want this. And this is why the birth of the scientific endeavour even began in the first place. People like Francis Bacon and Descartes were like, no, we can use our reason to make the world better, actually. And it turned out that they could, but there was a consequence to that, and that was essentially the death of God, which is what Nietzsche was lamenting. Mm-hmm. And so now we are in a position where it's like, okay, well, maybe the suffering, it was bad, but maybe it had a point.
It always reached a peak, though, I found. Like, if you look in like the Victorian era, where England especially was gripped with things such as alcoholism, and the change wasn't done through political means, it was done through a spiritual aspect of everyone going back to church. And it's like a loop. The argument is that God allows this to happen for you.
Okay, now again, in terms of Sargon speech, there's a lot of assumptions in there. We need them because we need sort of quick, tight narratives to try to navigate and make sense. And we leverage authority because we look at books, and we have, universities that have pillars and domes and things like that, and impressive buildings and granite and marble. And so we set up these authorities, and then we, bow to the authority, and we don't call people priests or shamans, but we call them professors and experts. And those are the authorities that we will bow to. But also, it's helpful to remember we ought to maintain a high degree of skepticism that, well, does everybody in the Middle Ages go to church? No, we know that's not true. Church participation in various ages dips. It goes up and down. Church participation, for example, during the time of the American Revolution was quite low. Church participation reaches its height, as best we can tell, in the United States during the Cold War. So there are so many moving pieces to this stuff that it's almost everything we say has to be qualified, but you can qualify things to death so that they're no longer useful in your mind. So you have to sort of keep working with them. Now, Lucas Voss on his channel, he sent me this. His brother Aaron sent me this. Really excellent conversation with DC Schindler on a variety of things. I really loved their treatment of the church earlier in the podcast. I'll put a link to this below. But let's DC Singers also is going to sort of play out a narrative here, and then we're going to talk about authority. And I think this contributes to it because, again, understand that you don't pick your authorities like you don't pick your beliefs. You find things authoritative. You find things compelling. In other words, authority is pre-volitional. It's super important to remember. And it's also collective and communal. And as I've said before, if let's say you have trouble believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, if you actually want to change that, go hang out with people who believe in them, who believe in it. Now, of course, that's not a surefire way. There are people who, let's say, our own T-Grog, who used to hang out with people who believed in the resurrection, and then he stopped. And so there's a lot to this, but part of this is that again, if we conceive of authority as climate as opposed to weather, these authoritative climates are battling each other. And you can hear that in Sargon pretty clearly. Now DC Schindler's gonna tell us a story here.
Interest in history, but I've over the years acquired an interest in political philosophy, which I never thought would happen, and now a desire. I just wish I knew history better. Yeah. It's too late for me on that score. But it is really interesting to think of, if you think of the church really is at the heart of the drama of the whole meaning of history, and I would affirm that. It's interesting to see, how modern history develops. You have you have this original convergence in the patristic period is when the church is taking up the pagan world, and in the medieval period is sort of where you have this kind of living relationship of a unity between the natural and supernatural, and then towards the end of the Middle Ages that you start to get this division, and we could talk about where it comes from, but think about it with the Reformation in the 16th century, and then the birth of the modern world. So the Reformation, now you finally have this kind of fragmentation that lets the world sort of emerge independently of the Christian story, as it were.
Yes. Okay, now, so often in our stories, we imagine that the church is a community living beneath a dome, let's say. And when people leave the church, they go out into the fresh air. And again, I don't think that's true, because the dome in the church is an attempted instantiation of the dome of heaven. And, Tim Keller was really helpful in this, in terms of people aren't sort of going from inside to outside. People are swapping different climates of authority over them. But it's clear that, again, Carlos Ayre's Reformations, the provocation of the Columbian Exchange, all that happens as the age of discovery begins to set off is that old world is falling apart. The image is being discarded, and very quickly new sources of authority are rising for hosts of reasons. And again, part of the reason our authorities are not subject to our volition is that they're too massive. And we can't pay attention to all of us. So actually, our brain and our mind and our community collectively, we are sort of creating a hash. And this has a feeling of authority, and this has a feeling of authority. And then increasingly, as we get in the fragmentation, we're looking at authorities for different things. And way back when I started making videos, I talked about the fact that part of what happens and DC Schindler is going to continue to progress through this, is that, okay, well, now we're going to trust science for certain aspects of our universe, and we're going to trust religion or family or parents or other institutions for other aspect of our universe, and things have continued to fragment and to fracture. And of course, COVID was a time when basically trust the science, the God of science, suddenly was in many ways subjected to the kinds of deconstruction that the gods of religion were before. Now, again, always remember that religion is a modern construct. The Greeks didn't do sacrifices because they had religion here and science there. The Greeks did sacrifices because your religion is your basic operating system that tells you what is real in the world and how to move things in the world in order to achieve the kinds of worlds that you're looking for.
And then, in the 17th century, the Enlightenment, it's sort of let's rethink the whole world outside of any connection to the church. The 18th century, you have the revolutions, which are nothing but establishing in reality a kind of rejection of
Christendom.
Of Christendom. That's the heart of it. That's what it is. Yeah. And then what's the 19th century? The 19th century is when an anti-Christian world has become now the global sort of default place. And this is the age in which the word boredom first was, didn't exist before, this is the industrialization. And then you think of all of these figures like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, whom we mentioned, Kierkegaard's another one, of this confrontation with them.
Now, it's not an unhelpful way to tell the story, but it is a little low resolution because of course, religion, again, which is a modernist concept. Religion doesn't go away. Religion continues to adapt. And you will get high levels of religious participation. You'll have enormously important religious movements. Now, D.C. Schindler is a Roman Catholic, and again, we've been focusing on the history of the Roman Catholic Church for a little while. There's a certain element of authority. Now, Tom Holland would say that it sort of reaches its peak around Pope Gregory and Emperor Henry, where Tom Holland has his in the UK. The book is Millennium. In the Forge of Christianity, the Forge of basically, Tom Holland notes that part of what happens in Christianity is this continual struggle between the life below and the life above. And boy, that's an enormously complex history. And there are divisions between East and West. But religion obviously does not go away after the Enlightenment. And one might argue that it might not even recede. Now, it's a harder case to make in Europe, but again, so much of it plays on this question of, well, what exactly are we tracking? Because you might say, well, once we sort of tag these institutions as religious and tag these other institutions as secular, well, then we can sort of do it. But of course, we're deep already then into science because we've already done our tagging. But then when you sort of switch frames and say, well, is the World Cup religious? Oh yeah, that's of course religious. Well, what do you mean? Well, it doesn't have like God or the Bible or Muhammad or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or meditation, but yeah, the World Cup is definitely religious. Well, is the stock market religious? Oh yeah, some people follow it religiously. Do people trust in the stock market going up and down? And is fiat currency religious? And very quickly you can see that this category breaks down. It's a useful category, it's a helpful category, but part of what's happening as we sort of have this recession of modernity is that the categories within it are breaking down. And with those categories, Luke is live streaming in the morning again, and the end of today's live stream was particularly good. Nate was really focusing in on some things. With those live streams, you can't. It's hard to clip them real, but it's up. I could play it.
That's my problem. Yeah.
Isn't that a feature, not a bug? Isn't that the point?
It's both.
Oh boy, you just went.
Well,
you guys gonna tiptoe around it? I don't understand.
No. It's true.
This is a brave space. The whole point is we're trying to make ethnocentrism great again.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Sorry.
Well, look. But again, so part of the hierarchy here, right, is that the Christian race has to be higher than whatever your skin color race thing is, right? It's that it's of the heart in Christ, identity in the body of Christ, rather than my identity as an Englishman.
What about your identity within the ideology of Christianity?
I mean, look, I am as much Israel as I am obedient, being his hands and feet.
Okay.
So I have a spicy and related question for Matt. Is it possible for American identity to continue into the future if we do not continue to be a Protestant nation? Because I'm not sure that they're in what we have the collection of ideas we refer to as America, I think requires an underlying just default Protestant culture in order to support it, because that
gets into that question of authority. Because again, authority has so much to do with our assumptions, our presuppositions. They're pre-volitional, and they seep in us, they seep around us. We find ourselves believing them completely apart from any desire sometimes.
It was never intended to be foundational, because it already looked to Protestant Christian tradition as its foundations, which is why this is like the whole idea of the neutrality of liberalism. It's not neutral. It just presumes a Protestant Christian foundation and then goes on from there. And it never occurs to it that there will at some point be a threat to that underlying foundation.
I have to bounce in 1 minute. Do you mind if I get up?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So Nate, to me, I think that the only serious conversation that could be had about that is like, it's just bigger than our lifetime. It's just so much bigger than our lifetimes that we can't even really speculate at it well. But we can look to the past and go, okay, what are things even within the Orthodox lineage that flame in and flare out? What branches die off? And it's more than the Orthodox tradition.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people who say, "Hey, empires fall. That's the flow of history. America, you have your run. It's time for that empire to fall too." And that is, boy, be careful what you wish for. That's what I would say. Be careful what you wish for, because what the world may look like in the absence of American empire is pretty terrifying.
So, do you have stuff to say, Matt?
Oh, just that I like what Nate's pointing at. I think, and not even from just.
And by the way, in case it's not obvious, like deeply challenging all of my own political presuppositions in the process.
I mean, what is the ARC project and those kind of movements? It's right. Saying we like Christianity because we see it as a foundation stone for classical liberalism, for this kind of open society culture that we thought didn't need foundations. And so can we signal back to Christianity in some way?
Right, yeah.
So that because we're really here for the classical liberalism. So how do we get back to that? Jesus, can you just give us
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's precisely right. That's exactly, and that's what's going on with James Lindsay, like maybe above all people, right? It's like, it's like he's rethinking his repenting of his new atheism because it's dawned on him, because he's in it for the project of modernity and the project of liberalism, which he sees the beauty of, and he also,
which again, if you listen to Sargon, it's so interesting because when he's asked about the divinity of Christ, he basically, it's Jesus saying, claiming to be God, he basically says, well, Jesus was sort of a sneaky Hellenist who came in, and they hated him because he was saying Hellenistic things about Jesus could be the son of God, just like Caesar was the son of God, and Alexander the Great was the son of God. And the guy pushes back and says, oh, wait a minute. That's really not, and when you connect that up with a whole bunch of other things, like he's the Alpha and the Omega and some of these other things, that's not at all what's going on in this culture downstream from Israel. And Sargon didn't quite know what to do with that, and so it just sort of went on. But Sargon and James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson, they all seem to be again in this boat, and so they're beginning to realize that if you want to maintain the fruits, you'd better do something to help the Protestant roots. And D.C. Schindler will talk about this as well, but Protestants actually have their roots in the church itself, and I think that's correct. Protestants, initially began as sort of a reform movement. We want to reform the church, and you could see this in Calvin and Luther. They did not want to leave the church, and they were shown the door, and of course, Protestantism just kept going on.
Sees like the terror of what's coming in its wake if we get rid of it. And the fact that he's focusing on the anti-Semitism issue is not accidental. Like I'll tell you right now that there is no group of people who rightfully have more anxiety about the potential death of liberalism in the West than Jewish people, because liberalism has created the conditions under which Jewish people could be a part of the culture and flourish in a way that is unprecedented. And there is lots of signs that the thing that is getting ready to replace it is absolutely hostile to them. And that is something I'm very personally invested with for reasons that should be pretty obvious. So this is one of the reasons my level of concern is so heightened. And it's like, okay, I need to start talking about politics, and this is why.
Glad you're talking about it.
Me too.
Which is what TLC's really good at is I really think this kind of shaman culture we have here, it's not just about like when we're cozy, we could just hang out in these kind of ambient liminal spaces and demonstrate to others and to ourselves that you could be comfortable in the midst of shifting sands and kind of weird estuary environments. And when it's not cozy, we're actually particularly good at noticing, at like identifying and articulating things on the horizon faster than
yes, but Matt, these illiberal forces that are on the rise are in our spaces. They're in our spaces, and they're not like, they are very clever about disguising themselves, and don't often show their true face, but they're there. And I'm deeply concerned about it.
And you got to be able to, and what I like about shaman culture is that we're not just merely saying we're aware, we're intensely aware 24/7 of the liberal gaze. That's a term that they'll understand. And so we're just signaling to that ambient liberal gaze that we don't like people to the right of us, so to speak, as defined by that liberal gaze. They define who people to the right of us is, and we have to publicly shun them. We're not doing, that's what people inside city walls do. People that wear like, wire hair, sheepskin, and eat insects in the desert, don't act like that. If they identify something, it's not for gain within the city, right?
Right,
So,
right.
I think we can. I trust this kind of environment because we can see stuff on the horizon.
Yeah, I will say that because that's good. That's good, Matt, because it's like I'm just being honest. Like I am not James Lindsay. I'm not James Lindsay, right? I don't think that modernism and liberalism are all the good that's ever been and that they'd have to be preserved at any cost. I don't think that. I just think that we don't know what's coming after them, and to rush headlong into the great replacement is
just
not a good idea.
Because we're not reactionaries here.
Right.
We don't just say, I'm going to do the opposite because you told me to do X, I'm going to do Y.
Right, right, exactly.
They say, are you for me or against me? The answer is no.
Well, so much of it is driven by doing the opposite, right? So it's like, okay, I hate wokeism, so I'm gonna make anti-Semitism cool again. Like, okay, like.
So here is my final word, and then I want to give everybody else a final word, and then we're gonna shut it down. What's gonna happen when James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson, because this is big for Jordan Peterson, which is why he probably doesn't understand Job or certain aspects, and all of us realize that Christianity cannot be used in a utilitarian way, and what it really involves is a laying down of your will.
Yeah.
Then what? I don't think you're going to like it then.
Yeah. At some point, Jesus says, I'm not feeding you anymore. You're going to have to eat me or nothing. Yeah. Sorry. Right. You're still coming here for handouts, for public, for some kind of idea that I'm going to, fix society for you. You're going to have to eat me.
And now, like
those are hard truths. Who can stick around? Which disciples are going to stick around? Most of them are going to walk away frustrated.
Matt. If you're interested, I've been trying to put together a talk on a kind of modest defense of liberalism for a while now. Shoot me an email if you're interested.
And Nate's and he's struggling mightily.
Just a modest one.
So long as
yeah, it has to be a modest defense coming from me, because there's a way in which, like, as a Christian anarchist, I'm also not a liberal, right?
No.
But I'm a different sort of not a liberal that can see the advantage of liberalism versus a lot of the alternatives that are being proposed.
You have to be a shaman with it, though, which you are very good at. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right.
I'm just saying, if I have a choice between living under liberalism or Catholic integralist state, it's going to be liberalism 100% of the time.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Okay, things are changing. That's what a shaman can do. A shaman can say, I changed my mind. Sorry. It's Thursday. I have a different story now.
No, I think that's always been my story. Although I have certain like overlapping sympathies with some of the way that a Catholic integralist would see the world. I think they come to the wrong conclusions, because I've always thought the state is the beast, and I don't think that wedding the state to the church is a good idea, because the state is inevitably the beast. The church is something else entirely. It's not something that's designed to be wedded to the state.
People need to read Samuel. Like, even asking.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yes.
No Old Testament here. Just
like, a very good shaman, Samuel.
Yeah.
Jess, close us out while I
don't even know what liberalism is.
Away.
Yeah,
good.
Who does?
Good. Oh, also, listen.
Sure,
No one go to Grail Country or the Grail Country Discord because it's full of mean people.
Oh, text chat. Avoid text chat. Just go to voice.
All right. Okay, let's keep going with this one.
Nihilism is also coined in the 19th century. You know, the first time that you have just this radical sense of nihilism, and the kind of Christianity that tended to, it didn't really get to the heart of this. You know, it tended to try to preserve religious ideas and things sort of next to
or within an
world.
accidental cosmos.
And exactly,
Yes,
right,
yes.
right. You know, while embracing kind of modern progress and things. And so, of course, it's either going to be totally irrelevant, or if it enters, it's always going to take the form of this oppressive intrusion on life. And that's, you know, Nietzsche makes a lot of sense when you think of him in that context.
Yeah, it stops aligning with the world that you inhabit. Like it's no longer
or enlivening.
Yes,
it's no longer the soul of the world.
Yes, but then that makes it interesting as to where we are today, right? Because that's Nietzsche. Nietzsche, and I like to think about Nietzsche and his answer to all of this, and kind of concluding that God is dead, and we kill him.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really poignant, and you read that, I mean, people think that it's this triumphant rejection of God or something, but you read that passage, I mean, that's not at all what it is.
There's some lines after that.
Oh, I know, exactly. And you see, it's Nietzsche's suffering. You know, he was, you know, it wasn't like he wanted there to be no God. It was, he thought of himself as speaking in a way on behalf of the world. Where are we going? And you know, there was a profound suffering in that. But what is curious is why he was unable to see. You know, why didn't he see something like a return to Christianity as a recovery of the life that he sought?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he seemed, and your brother actually, Lucas's brother is somewhat of a scholar on Nietzsche, really.
I
he
didn't
teaches Nietzsche.
know. Oh, wow. Yeah.
He did his master's thesis on Nietzsche, titled "The Pious Antichrist." Nietzsche as a religious thinker. So he's been very deep into this for years now, and that's his thinker basically. So
that's amazing. I wrote my senior thesis in college on Nietzsche and tragedy, and tried to judge it from a Christian perspective.
That's wonderful. I'd love to read that, by the way.
I mean, I was 20 years old when I wrote it. You know,
that's why I would like to read it.
Yes.
So, Lucas, you mentioned like, what do we do? You know, how do we take this till the moment now? See, like, I was talking to Lucas. I hope this isn't offensive, but I was talking to Lucas before about this, and the way I described it, as a modern person, someone who grew up in modernity, in a Protestant town of like I don't know if there's anybody familiar with the ancient church in driving range. And so
thank goodness for the internet then, right? Yeah.
Right. And so it's it's a different community. I have a wonderful Orthodox church near where I live now. But growing up in that world, so the analogy that I gave to Lucas was like, man, I love the church. I want to participate in the church as it is, and I see a kind of purity, almost like a seed kind of purity of the early church, in the sense, and I don't deny the expression of church as it is right now.
Okay, this is a long, long story, and that's why I've got a little bit of skepticism about sort of imaginative time travel to past ways of seeing things and attempting to reconstruct, because look at almost every significant revival movement in the church. They are all trying to do very similar things to get to those halcyon days of Acts 2 and Acts 4, where everybody shared what was in common, and the early church, the early church had massive problems. Now they're going to get to the point of talking about Christ's prayer that the church would be one. And one of the things that I think we have to do is really ask ourselves, what on earth do we mean by that? Because, of course, Roman Catholics might say, yeah, Orthodox, you got to come into Rome. Protestants, you got to give up your protest. That will do it. Was the church one when Paul was complaining about the Judaizers? And how, in fact, did Paul get along with James the Just, Jesus' brother? I don't know. But there certainly seemed to be some tensions going on there. There were tensions between Peter and Paul. And read the book of Revelation and then read church history. And I mean, it's issue after issue after issue. So this desire to go back, well, I'll go back if I can get into a building in a room with icons on the walls and with liturgy from the 5th century or the 4th century. And fair enough. I am not going to criticize that. But all of these different Christian traditions are all in some ways employing different sorts of technology in order to get back to the genuine article. And they sort of try to lay hands on it temporally. I think it's fair to ask questions about that project. I'm not saying it's the project itself is bad. I'm not saying it's poorly motivated, but let's let them keep going.
In its reality, in its multiplicity, in its size, and its growth. But there's a kind of purity of like the seed at the beginning that I see that church somehow is more true or real, or is I shouldn't say more real. What I mean is it's more of the
Evidence.
essence, closer.
Yeah.
Right. And it seems closer in time, closer in practice, closer in worldview. And so, but now, like, I am a modern person and I exist and I am a product of the modern world. And so my analogy was like, man, the church as it was, that's not an option now. Like the church is bifurcated. And so the church is schismed and divorced. And so I said, it's like, I feel like an orphan looking for a family.
It's helpful to remember, because we just went through this liturgically, out of 12, one is lost. What about out of 120? And then as the church begins to grow and penetrate the Eastern Roman Empire and goes all the way to Rome, and if you read, let's say, what's called the First Epistle of John, that's about division. And so these things have to be owned.
And the only option is divorced parents.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, I it's funny.
And of course, I think lurking under this is this conversation of authority. Because when he says divorced parents, it's like, oh, that sort of brings us back to my conversation with Ray and the tragedy of his family growing up. I mean, his mother basically has to rescue him and his brother from his father. And it's a crazy story. It's not an uncommon story. Maybe some of the details in his story are extreme, but
I've always felt like the Orthodox and the Catholics were kind of on the same team, you know, to put it in kind of banal language.
Way to leave us out.
With respect to the modern world, and that there's a kind of but it's interesting.
And that, again, he's Roman Catholic. He teaches at John Paul something in Washington, D.C. And my whole conversation with Kale is about Vatican I, which doesn't really end, and then Vatican II. I mean, Vatican I is the church, at least to some degree, feeling threatened and wanting to address modernity. And then, of course, going into the 20th century, in many ways, certain areas of the church cozying up with Franco, cozying up with Mussolini. They couldn't cozy up with Hitler because he was already killing their priests. And so then their excuse with Hitler is, we can't really say anything against Hitler or he'll persecute us. And to a certain degree, have they said something similar to what's going on in China? And I'm not trying to play an anti-Catholic game here. And anybody who has watched enough of me knows that is definitely not at all what I desire to do on YouTube. That is not at all what I desire to do. But we have to own up to the struggles that the church has had with these questions. And D.C. Schindler a little bit later is going to say, yeah, Protestants are in there. But what he says here about authority, that really grabbed me. And in fact, when I made the video about authority, that's when a bunch of people jumped out and said, oh, have you seen the conversation that Lucas had with D.C. Schindler?
Some conversations I've had with my wife, when she hears that someone is becoming Orthodox, she always says that it saddens her that that it's not, being Catholic, what. And I normally haven't felt that sort of sadness, because as I said, I sort of think of for me, the point is this living connection to the ancient, to the church, the continuity with the whole apostolic succession and that kind of thing. But I've come to realize I need to think more about this, and the division really is that's tragic. I mean, the Reformation is uber tragic. I mean, with the real fragmentation. I mean, think about how different the conversation would be between Christianity and the secular world if Christianity basically meant one thing.
Yes.
And wasn't a kind of an infinite.
Now, that's such a nice thing to say. But what on earth do we actually mean by it? If Christianity meant one thing, at the end of my conversation with Roy, okay, all you need is love. God is love. I mean, the one thing, let's say the one thing that Christianity means is love. But what we're dealing with now is love as rigor or love as liberation. I mean, that's sort of the big divide that's happening now. And we've lived a long time now with love as liberation, and now we're starting to get back to love as rigor. And love always is, love expresses itself sometimes in liberation and sometimes in rigor. A mother's love is not liberated from the needs of her child. The mother's love is rigorous towards the need of her child.
Number of different churches and so forth. It's just it sort of has lost all credibility in a way.
There's something there. The loss of credibility, I think, to a modern person and to the modern world. Like, I'm lucky, and I think I genuinely put the credit to this to my parents. My parents who grew.
Okay, here it comes. The formation of authority. And now he's made a transition from growing up Pentecostal into Orthodoxy. But again, if you sort of know what you're looking for when you're listening to people talk, here it comes.
Grew up in a secular world, but who, because of having such great parents, I was able to, like I said, I went through real trauma with the local church. I was completely cut off from my community for not following things I believe to be wrong. And so, but
now, remember just a minute ago we talked about oneness? And we're navigating individualism. We're navigating this supernova of information going out that has done a lot to sort of shred climate level authority.
That didn't make me despise the church. That didn't make me leave. I was able to then go, okay, reality's still good. The church, whatever it is, I love it. So there's something of the loss of credibility. It feels that way, and I feel like I'm trespassing so far beyond what I should have any reason to speak about. But at the same time, on the other hand, I believe something like the meaning after the postmodern predicament, after the meaning crisis, or from here, I, at least right now, believe there's either the church can somehow become unified, or this is the end of our world, the end of our civilization. I'm not sure. But it seems that for the church to be the answer, it needs to be married. It needs to be somehow one. And yet the practical boots on the ground reality, that seems absolutely unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so, I mean, this is the drama of history, and that problem is at the heart of the drama of history. And it's striking if you think about the farewell speeches in Scripture, in John's Gospel, when Christ is saying, "Okay, I'm leaving." What did he talk about? He talked about unity. That they may be one, as you speaking to the Father, as you and I are one. It's interesting that unity should be so central in this final sort of message to humanity. That's striking, and we have really betrayed that in the various schisms. So how does that, I mean, to me, that, there's hope, and then there's reason for despair. The reasons for despair are, like you say, boots on the ground. It's hard to see evidence of that. And I mean, in terms of the Catholic Church, there have been so many scandals and problems. I mean, it's hard to understand how anyone can retain faith in one respect. But there's also profound reasons for hope. I mean, one is that the reality of it is greater than any individual persons and decisions that we might make. There's a sense in which the reality abides. Reality remains good, as you said earlier, Matthew, and that's also, the church remains good, even if even if the good church is embodied in sinful members, the church remains good. And it's also, I think, a sign of hope that there are so many people now that want to recover the ancient church. I mean, that seems to be exploding in a way, this desire to recover the tradition in ways when I was growing up, nobody would speak in that way at all. I mean, nobody.
Again, except that all the Restorationist movement, the Protestant Reformation, Jehovah's Witnesses would attempt to Gil Bilizikian, not Redeemer, but Willow Creek Church, the Seeker movement, all of this. I mean, Gil Bilizikian, the first century church. It's just now the focus has moved from a variety of fairly Protestant-themed efforts into more liturgical, practical, monastic. That's been the transition. The motive to get back to the first century has remained the sort of time machine that we're looking to have has changed.
And now it's becoming fairly common. And maybe that there's a common love of, I mean, and this is something that includes even Protestants for whom the tradition is not as central. I mean, I know many Protestants who want a more traditional form of Christianity. So, I mean,
But again, this word of tradition, what on earth do you mean by that? I still have to get through David Bentley Hart's Apocalypse and Tradition. I started it. But it's deeply important here because, okay, what is tradition? Okay, well, what exactly do you mean? So you're going to participate in the Divine Liturgy? Do you go back to Latin Mass? And I'm pretty sure at the Lord's Supper they weren't speaking Latin. Were they speaking Greek? You may have that argument. Most likely Aramaic. So should the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and all of the world church sort of go back to Aramaic. But then in many ways, we're back in Muslim and in some ways Latter-day Saints territory. Because, again, a big element of the Christian church is that it always worked in translation. The Bible of the New Testament church was the Greek Old Testament. And part of the reason that Christianity has had this adaptive power to engage all kinds of different cultures was that it can handle it. So I'm always, when I'm talking to my friend Kale, we had this conversation about the Roman Catholic Church after Pope Francis this week. Desire to go to the Latin Mass. Okay, fair enough. Go for it. But there's a reason that Vatican II went to the vernacular, and there's a reason that Protestant churches went to the vernacular. Because I can completely understand how the Latin sounds magical, especially now after Harry Potter. But if you go back to the Latin Mass because Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling cooked up some spells in Latinish language, then suddenly the Catholic Church feels enchanted when you're doing the Mass in Latin. Okay. I'm a Protestant. I'm the flexible kind. So...
And that sort of common desire could, introduce new possibilities of a kind of recovery of unity. I mean, who knows? But
yes,
it's hopeful.
Yes, Wolfgang.
I mean, would you say that's your experience, Lucas? What's your experience with the in terms of a desire for sort of traditional?
Yeah, well, it is happening. Like recently,
Lucas likes old things. His major in college was Egyptology, so I love Lucas. If you are in the Netherlands and you are not participating in Lucas's estuary with Aaron and his father Bas, you are missing out. If I lived in the Netherlands, those guys, they would totally be my estuary crew. They are the best. They are so much fun. They are top quality, top shelf people.
There was an article just from the Netherlands here, really young people joining Orthodox churches, even people that don't listen to Jonathan Pichot. somehow get there too.
He's been the key. Yeah,
he's been the key somehow. But no, there is that shift happening, and at the same time, when I really think about it realistically, I find it hard to see. But then again, who thought Christ would rise from the dead? Even when he was seen, they wouldn't. The women that saw him at the grave, it's like they were scared, they were shocked. It's not. So I think we're kind of having our own descent in a way.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's necessary. And I wanted to add a little bit of Wolfgang Smith in here because he's had a big impact on me and Matthew both. And he's since passed recently. But
I just learned that yesterday or 2 days ago. I didn't.
Now, if you're curious about Wolfgang Smith, Lucas talked to him. Karen Wong at the Meaning Code talked to him. So he's been around the corner.
Know that he had passed, actually.
Yes, it was relatively recently. Luckily, he lived a very long life.
He did.
I paid a tribute to him. I made a video of his, like a conglomeration of his work. But yeah, he had a big impact on me. But one of the things,
interesting,
it really stuck with me somewhat. It's also the reason I started this podcast. Almost, it kind of lured me onto the internet because I thought he was so gripping that I wanted to speak about his work. Anyway, he kind of offhand mentioned one time that he believed the church had to become one again. It's not a central part of his work. And then when he was pressed upon on this very topic, he was like, "Well, do you know Malachi Martin by chance?"
I know the name. I've never. I mean, kind of an apocalyptic thinker. Is that?
I'm not 100% sure. I honestly don't know him very well, but he was very close to Wolfgang, and he had this idea. And Wolfgang is actually. I was going to Roman Catholic Church here close by. I just picked the closest church here, and Wolfgang was the person that kind of made me stop going.
Oh, wow!
Enough, because he was convinced that the Catholic Church was, ever since a certain Vatican Council, no longer legitimate or something like that.
Right.
And at the same time, so he was going to some sort of an underground Catholic church. He was
There's a lot of that. I know many people that are taking that direction.
It really, because I'm out of this world. I'm not in this world at all. So
no, it's. I mean, it's part of the tragedy, and that when I was talking about various scandals. So that was the Vatican II, a council that occurred in the '60s.
Yes.
That it was the church's attempt to engage with the modern world, and there were. So there's some people that think that was the beginning of the end of the Catholic Church and a sign of a kind of radical betrayal. But I don't think that's. I don't think that's the right way to read it.
That's reassuring.
But I do. It was often the case, if you look at the whole history of the church, it's often the case that when you had councils, there would be decades of unrest afterwards, because what happened at the council would be interpreted one way and then another way, and that it would take a good century for the true teaching of the council to be finally sort of realized, and all sorts of tendencies to heresy in the meantime. And I think something similar could be said about Vatican II.
Yeah.
Immediately there was this modernizing of the church. There are many impulses in that direction that are clearly signs of betrayal of the heart of it. But I think that in figures like John Paul II and Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, they represent, I think, a more authentic interpretation of the council. But, the problem is then in the last just couple of decades, especially, so Wolfgang Smith would be kind of an earlier, and some of my family, my father's side of the family took that route too.
Interesting.
Completely split from the church.
Yes.
To follow a more traditionalist. I mean, I love that, as you can tell from what I've said earlier, this desire to recover the tradition, absolutely, and this criticism of modernity, absolutely, but to do it in a way that breaks with the tradition.
Yes, it feels like what we were speaking about before, the negation, the saying no, the rejection.
That's right. Criticizing from the outside.
It comes back to our earlier point of going.
Thank you.
Yes.
Does this this is so simple it doesn't need to be said, but does this have to do with you spoke to Ken Lowry about authority, and that was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
But what you talked about in authority was this kind of, the authority is actually, again, it's not just top down. The authority is the mediator. The authority is that you're actually just being the lens for what's coming from above. And so to split with the church, or to split in order to preserve in nostalgia something that was prior, somehow you lose authority because you are no longer family, you're no longer together.
No, that's absolutely true. And do you know, I actually think that what Nietzsche most regretted, was a loss of a principle of authority in the world, actually. I think that's a very unusual way of reading Nietzsche. But when it occurred to me, I have to say it has clarified so many things in his work. And that's like will to power is kind of like a substitute authority.
Yes.
Sorry?
Like authority is dead and we have killed it. Something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And then there's no point of reference. And so the whole cosmos is kind of spinning out what's up and what's down. Nothing, you don't have any real ultimate reference point that gives order to things. And that's exactly right. If you try to recover a tradition in a nostalgic way, you're turning it into a content that is detached from the historical mediation. And so, the irony is the traditionalists are modernists, because because the only way to participate in tradition is to receive it historically, concretely. And so, right, the moment you have that decisive break, there really is no way to get back except by, through forgiveness and, this more.
And if we go back to a while ago when Peugeot was talking about druids, Peugeot was basically saying, you can no longer be a druid. The tradition is lost. There are no druids to maintain the tradition to you. But then again, you were back to the original question of how is that, I could call it often the narrative thread. How is the genuine article? How is that thing that connects us to Christ? And again, the Protestant Reformation happens because the church said it is the church that connects you to Christ through apostolic succession. And the reformers looked around and said, do you know what your bishops are doing? You're buying and selling ecclesiastical offices. The papacy is a joke because it's being bought and sold by the powerful families of Italy. And someone is running around Germany selling indulgences to get out of purgatory early, to help with the building program of St. Peter's Cathedral. And on we go. And so the question of, okay, what fuels the time machine? It's really where we're at. We the Bible, the Word. Again, one way to look at the history of the church is look at the Orthodox, the liturgy, the liturgy, the liturgy. Look at the Catholics, the Eucharist, the Eucharist, the Eucharist. You look at the Protestants, the preaching of the Word, the preaching of the Word, the preaching of the Word. Like now we're getting sort of into the communion of the saints. The metagelical age where here you've got a Roman Catholic, kid who grew up Pentecostal. The Roman Catholic says his father went off into a schismatic Catholic group because couldn't believe in the hierarchy anymore. The Pope isn't holding the church together. What is holding the church together? Again, in one way at least, he succeeded. Francis, for generations, modernizers lamented the outsized power of the papacy and the anachronism of monarchical authority in a democratic age. That's exactly what Vatican II was to resolve. The way the concept of papal infallibility froze Catholic debates. Again, the papal infallibility from Vatican I, when they're trying to deal with modernity, and they looked around at the divine right of kings. And remember, Vatican I is a conflict between Gallicanism, the French king, and the Pope, who at this point still had papal states, which of course all will then shrink at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And the Pope begins the period with Mussolini as the prisoner in the Vatican. When you were elected Pope, you were elected to be a prisoner. And then finally, an agreement was reached with the Italian government, and so in that way, sort of, the modern papacy begins, and then in Vatican II will continue to go out. In theory, Francis shaped those concerns, promising a more collegial, horizontal-oriented church, more synodical, in the jargon of the Catholic bureaucracy. In practice, he often used his power in the same way as his predecessors, to police and suppress deviations from his authority, except that this time the targets were dissenting, conservatives and traditionalists instead of progressives and modernizers. But just by creating the novel form of conflict in which Catholics who had been accustomed to being on the same side as the Vatican found themselves suddenly crosswise from papal authority, Francis helped to demystify his office's authority and undermine its most imposing claims. That's because the conservatives whose convictions that the church would be one, maybe under the Bishop of Rome, the church whose convictions he unsettled were the last believers in the imperial papacy, the custodians of infallibility's mystique. And by stirring more of them to doubt and disobedience, he kicked away the last major prop supporting a strong papacy and left the office of St. Peter in the same position as most other 21st century institutions, graced with power but lacking credibility, floated on charisma without underlying legitimacy, and in its actions understood in terms of rewards for friends and punishments for enemies, which again, people are a little shocked that I said, there's a certain way that there's a parallel between Francis and Trump, even though in many ways they look completely opposite. But that, of course, is the fear of tyranny, that one uses the vast position of power that they have to reward friends and punish enemies and rivals. We call that corruption. And D.C. Schindler is right. Authority is the kind of thing that works through us. The church has credibility if they believe the authority of God is passing through it. But if it's passing through a regime that is covering for pedophile priests, and of course, this is all of, just listen to all the deconstruction stories. These are all of the things that climate level authority evaporates, and then people look for authority in the secret sacred self, look for authority in their feelings, all the sorts of things we see here and now, or find some guru, maybe some Christian Reformed minister on YouTube who keeps wearing blue shirts because you gotta wear something in stripes and plaids, which I normally wear, sort of monkey with the camera. Because in the vacuum of authority, people will project and look and often make bad choices. Well, this has probably gone on too long, but sometimes I finish a video and it's like, oh, this is terrible. Sometimes I finish a video and thought, I was able to sort of say what I wanted to say. That's how I feel right now. But maybe I messed it up. Maybe you didn't get to the end, because I don't know how long this is, but I think it's a long one. Leave a comment. Let me know.